the connections between the opioid epidemic and the war on terror? I was doing some research about what really happened on 9/11, getting ready to launch a channel on that app that rhymes with WhoCube. Coming soon, it's gonna be tight. And I got sidetracked by the connections between the war on terror and the opioid crisis. So just to clarify, you realize that we went to war with terrorism, which in the year 2000 in the US killed 0 people? That's right, 0. But all these other problems, they were pretty big. We won't get into how cardiovascular disease is correlated to the poison in the food that we're being fed by corporations. Because excluding the 3,000 people that were killed on September 11th, terrorism kills on average 8 people a year for this time range. Whereas 431 people a year die in their bathtubs, 200 die in deer accidents, and we're out here declaring war on terrorism? And if you've ever seen the Zeitgeist documentary, then you would have seen this slide where it said that in '80, Afghanistan produced no opium. Then after we backed the Mujahideen, taking power in '86, they produced 40% of the world's heroin supply. By '99, that was 80% of the total world supply. And when the Taliban rose to power in the year 2000, they outlawed it and destroyed all the poppy fields and reduced production by 94%. Excuse me? Why was I not taught about this in school? And let's be clear, the Taliban is pretty reprehensible. The way they treat women can go to hell. Not trying to defend the Taliban here at all. And then on September 9th, 2001, 2 days before September 11th, the full Afghanistan invasion plans were on President Bush's desk. That sounds like quite the conspiracy theory now, doesn't it? Sounds a little far-fetched, but if you notice, they're citing sources in the corner. And I went and looked up all 3 of these different sources. This book, which is very thorough and has tons of citations of its sources. These reports, which are put out by the UN. And yes, even the NBC article describing the plan to invade Afghanistan, which hit Bush's desk 2 days before September 11th, found that one too. So if you were alive back then, you'd remember how we were first told we have to go to war over there to stop terror, because that's what you do when something kills 8 people every year. And side note, you would also remember that we had this weird pivot that was kind of confusing from this is the Taliban to, oh, and this guy has WMDs, which were proven to not really exist. So we should probably go depose him and take over that too, which is a whole other rabbit hole. I'm looking at you, Donald Rumsfeld, Halliburton, Dick Cheney. So let me walk you through how Big Pharma played a massive role in the opioid epidemic, which most people my generation lost friends to, many friends to. First, it's prescription drugs. Then your prescription runs out and you turn to, and then, why not develop stronger, more effective versions of that one, which takes off, just a few years later. At the height of the opioid epidemic, 8 out of 10 Americans were prescribed an opioid every year. Let me remind you that this was not an accident. Pharma intentionally lied, misled, committed fraud, gave kickbacks to doctors for prescribing these things. I'm trying to go fast here, but you can look up all this information for yourself. The Sackler family had to pay about $6 billion in fines for Purdue Pharma's role in all this, and they're still worth plenty of money. By 2015, at the height of the nation's opioid epidemic, Johnson & Johnson was the leading supplier of the raw ingredients in painkillers in the United States. They even had their own special strain of poppy. This is reported by the New York Times, who just also happened to report that Afghanistan produced 83% of the world's opium from 2015 to 2020. Weird. I suppose that means it's mathematically impossible that Johnson & Johnson isn't running these fields, at least some of them. Allegedly, TikTok, allegedly. This is for entertainment purposes only. I'm not trying to state facts. The whole video is satire, by the way. So this is all just like a harebrained conspiracy theory with no evidence to back it up, but it's, kind of weird that all of this was easily sourced using public information available on Google. Sources like the National Institute of Health and the UN, mainstream media like NBC and the New York Times. You'd think that if there was really clear evidence that big pharmaceutical companies were profiting hugely off of the opioid crisis, which was strangely connected to the war on terror, that they would at least try to hide the information a little better. Allegedly, obviously, none of this is real. I'm obviously don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just glad that history doesn't repeat itself and that now we have just wars. Speaking of which,